Welcome to Americana Archives. Today we have part 2 of the story Peary and his Dash for the Pole. It says, the Roosevelt, as she was seen in New York, and her crew, gave no clear notion of what she will look like after she leaves Cape Breton, officered and furnished for her actual destiny. But Peary himself was just as he will be in the Polar Sea. Cool, shrewd, quick, clear-headed, executive, courteous, strong, and determined. The most remarkable thing about him is his voice. One can fancy such a voice echoing through the stillness of the frozen north, lending courage and cheerfulness to the Eskimos, to the tired dogs, to the disgruntled crew. Cheerfulness is very important, he said, when speaking about the kind of young surgeon he wanted to go with him. I don't want a man that gets frightened and frightens everyone else about him. I want a cheerful man, and that he ought to be, because he can't spend a cent of what he earns among the bears. It was during a trying hot wave that I finally cornered Peary in New York, and he was as high-strung as a young colt, in spite of the heat. He is tall, lithe, sinewy. He wore an ordinary blue serge suit, a blue checkered camping shirt, no necktie, and an old straw hat that was of the 99-cent variety. If you saw Peary in a Broadway car and did not know him, you would take him for a rather intelligent sea captain who had seen bad weather. There are deep furrows in his face, traces of exposure, endurance, of physical suffering and mental struggles. He has a bristling fair mustache, entirely neglected as to prettiness, deep-set big clear gray eyes that look right through you, a hand as big as a man's hand can be, and he stands over 6 feet and folds into 3 when he sits down. His accent is like a Yankee skipper's, and he is emphatic in everything he says, frequently pounding his knee with his big fist or pulling his mustache as if it were a halyard. I've got all the money I want, and there's no reason why we can't sail at once, he began, rushing into words at full speed, as if the interview were an ice pack. He is a vehement chap, is Peary, and when he pushes his hat to the back of his head, he is ready for action. Why did you need so much more money, I asked. He looked sharply at me for a moment. Then, striking the palm of his hand with his forefinger, he said incisively, Now tell me just exactly what you want, and I will try to give it to you quickly, because I am compelled to be in a dozen places at once these days. It was only his habit of marshaling others to act quick and think quick, a habit that had come upon him because of the serious delay in his departure for the North. I repeated my question. I needed money for a duplicate set of instruments, in case of accident, and for prize money to a crew that have learned to expect provision for their efforts beyond the mere pay and rations of ordinary sailors. How many will you have on board, I asked. There will be 20 of us all told that will go for the North Pole. Then he shifted nervously in his chair, jumped up to answer a telephone call, strode back beside me, and pulled his mustache silently a few seconds. It seems to me there is less known, less that seems to be understood by the newspapers about the character of an expedition to the North Pole than about anything I can think of, he said in his deep, rumbling, cheery voice. To begin with, it requires a man of exceptional temperament and a crew of almost superhuman qualities to undertake a voyage like this. It is not only a national interest, but an effort that affects international affairs, and yet the amount of money I have asked for seems to be the only point of extraordinary interest in New York. I've got it now, and my plans are made possible because of it, and I am thankful, only I wish it had come a month earlier. Why, millions have been expended in the efforts made by others, but the main object still remains unattained. Exactly. How do you intend to reach the pole? Very carefully, Commander Peary outlined his trip, his plans, and his reasons. For nearly 4 generations, occupied in exploring the North Pole, only 3 possible routes have been accepted. Personally, I think they have dwindled to 2. I consider Nansen's route, which is known as the drift method, to be impractical, though its possibilities are generally acknowledged. Because Nansen was fortunate, does not argue that another vessel would be as lucky in resisting the ice crush so long. And then, the drifting of the ice currents is so slow that it would mean a ship full of people imprisoned, helpless, at the mercy of the ice for 4 or 5 years, practically unable to control their own fortunes or contribute by any specific effort to their own success. The second route, via the Franz Joseph Land, although it brought the Duke Abruzzi further north than any other explorer, is considered by him unavailable, since he recommended the Smith Sound, or American route, as the most promising. My plans are these. I plan to take the Roosevelt first to Cape Breton, ship my crew, then push north up Smith Sound, Kennedy Channel, and Robeson Channel, and then to go into winter quarters on the north coast of Grant Land. If she gets me as far as that, I don't care what becomes of her. She will have served her purpose in getting me to 8250, Cape Joseph Henry, which will be my base of action. A second vessel, loaded with coal, will land it on Grant Land, near the northern entrance of Robeson Channel. I shall then have enough reserve of coal to keep the furnaces and engines on the Roosevelt going at the utmost tension through the ice. Then this reserve will be handy to take the Roosevelt back, should she survive the ice crush. From Joseph Henry, I will make the dash for the pole on sledges, a journey that ought to be accomplished in one season of 100 days. I shall take the Eskimos with me to my northern base. Upon my return from the polar dash, I shall return on the Roosevelt if conditions are favorable. If the ice is impenetrable or the Roosevelt disabled, I shall proceed by land south to Cape Sabine, over a route which I laid out on previous expeditions, and there meet my auxiliary steamer to bring me home. This is the plan, Peary told me, which has the approval and sympathy of President Roosevelt, who, in expressing his sympathy and approval, associates himself with a long list of illustrious names in the past: Ferdinand of Spain, Charles V, Henry VII, Elizabeth, all patrons of exploration. What conditions do you expect at the pole? I asked. Until we reach the pole, no one can say what there is there, whether land or water, said Peary. As a matter of fact, there may be land within 30 miles of Nansen's or Abruzzi's farthest, and yet neither of them was the wiser for it. Because of these facts, one man's views are as good as another's, assuming the men to be equally competent to judge. It is your theory that there is probably land in the central polar basin? I am a practical worker, taking what I find rather than theorizing as to what I ought to find. Still, I believe in the probability. I have said little about this because long years of Arctic work and disappointments have taught me pessimism. The existence of land anywhere between the northern shore of Grant Land and the pole would greatly simplify my work. Of course, like all men of action, Peary has been adversely criticized. Men who are skeptics and men who distort motives, like a solo individual I encountered on the deck, whose trunk was on board the Roosevelt and who wished it was ashore because he could not trust the crew he had seen and thought to be incompetent for polar exploration, something never expected of them. But Peary's nature is at heart patriotic, his ambition to plant the stars and stripes on the top of the earth. As a matter of prestige, it is worthwhile, he said once in a public address. Should you some morning read in your paper that an American had placed the stars and stripes upon the pole, each one of you would feel a thrill of pride and enthusiasm and be glad that you are an American. Every true American at home and abroad would feel the same pride. As a matter of patriotism based upon the obligations of our manifest destiny, it is worthwhile. And yet, the money that he needed, which was just as accessible a month ago, has only reached him at the last possible moment before sailing. The technical advantages of this expedition over previous Peary explorations are first a powerful ship 185 feet long, with 1,500 horsepower engines, in place of a sailing vessel with auxiliary engines and a base 200 miles further north than his previous one at Cape Sabine. The expedition is under the auspices of the Peary Arctic Club, an association which met first in 1898 at 44 Pine Street, New York. However, these are merely contributing elements The true life, spirit, and enduring impulse of the expedition is Commander Robert E. Peary himself. This article was written by Pendennis. This story came from the great state of Nebraska, being reported in the Lincoln Daily Star of August 6, 1905. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.